For our COBT friends, it's Maynard, Mike, and Arjun here with a really fun guest, Captain John Konrad. You might know him because he's the CEO of gCaptain, which has been around since 2007. It's a newsletter. It's really an entire community of shipping aficionados all around the planet. Hundreds of thousands of people. I think at least almost 100,000 get your newsletter, John. Many more on Facebook. But John has really dedicated his professional career to understanding all aspects of shipping. And the more we've read gCaptain, the more we've been struck by how many energy topics show up in shipping. There's, of course, propulsion. There's the sustainability of the ocean. There's LNG. There's just commerce, trade, so many different things going on in shipping. The more we got to know John, the more excited we got to have him on the show. So John, let me just pause and say thank you so much for joining us. You're in Western Mass, and so we're delighted to have you.
Beautiful Berkshires here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, when we're up in Boston, we're definitely going to drive out and see you, John. So that's why I had to highlight Western Mass. It's not that far from Boston, so we're coming if you'll have us. Well, before we get going here with John, Mike, what would you tell all of us about the markets this past week?
Yeah, I'd say the thing the markets are looking at right now is CPI is going to be reported tomorrow. Obviously, it's going to really go into thinking of the FOMC meeting on September 20th coming up. So I think the CPI tomorrow is expected to be around 3.6%. If we're above that, then I think markets are going to sell off pretty handily because most people expect the FOMC meeting that there's going to be a pause in rate hikes. So we'll see. So the next week is important. The second thing economically is the UAW strike. September 14th is the deadline. That's on Thursday. If that hits, then that's just going to add some more pressure to the Fed to do something as well. So we'll see what happens there. In regards to the commodity markets, crude oil today is, we almost touched $90 in WTI. We're a little bit above $89. Brent's about $92, $93. And a couple things I'd point out is the reason why we're surging today is OPEC basically is saying that the markets in Q4 are going to be about 3 million barrels undersupplied. They're around 2 million barrels undersupplied in this quarter. And so the last time we were this undersupplied on a quarterly basis was Q3 and Q4 of 2021. And crude was substantially higher. If we look at where time spreads are right now, 12-month time spread, Brent and WTI time spreads, they're at levels that we last saw in June of 2021, June of 2022, and crude oil WTI was above $110 a barrel. So the market's really in deficit. And the last thing we want to basically talk about is it's going to be really difficult this time to basically throw SPR in the market. Last time we had crude levels at crude at these levels, time spreads at these levels, we had almost 600 million barrels in the SPR. Today we're at 350 million barrels. So you're not going to have that. And so the last thing I probably want to say is, we haven't heard the Biden administration really talking about this move higher in crude oil prices. And the reason why is, regular unleaded gasoline prices are not above $4 a gallon. If we get above $4 a gallon, which is a really, really potential, then you're going to start to hear a lot more out of these guys. So just, I would be aware of that over the next couple of weeks or so.
Mike, is there any noise? I noticed this deal we seem to have struck with the Iranians on an exchange of people and letting some money flow. Is that chatter showing up in the oil markets that maybe we're going to have an Iran deal? It
has been showing up in the markets, but I think it's really been out there for the last, say 1 or 2 months. And the reason why it's been out there is because Iran is putting oil on the markets, and it's, people want to understand is what is the excess capacity of Iran. Iran over the last 12, 18 months has put almost 1 million barrels on the water. And so people are now saying, okay, OPEC has spare capacity, but Iran was always the big culprit. Well, a lot of Iran's spare capacity is gone now as well. And so you have Iran's spare capacity is essentially gone, and now you have essentially OPEC, meaning Saudi, is in control of the global markets, and that's a really good thing. So I think what markets are looking at right now is what's going to happen when Saudi starts to put more oil back in the market. How is the markets going to react? If the markets react well, crude oil markets, then I think what's happening right now is equities are lagging because equities are concerned when oil prices come down, what's going to be the effect. And so if oil prices hold, I think you're going to see energy equities multiples expand.
Okay. Well, this is yet another topic we can get to with John, which is, the pinch points around the world and and where things are flowing. Arjun, what would you throw in the hopper here before we turn to our friend John?
Maynard, the last month and a half of super spiked, we've spent a lot of time talking about the outlook for demand, how we think it's being significantly underestimated on a long-term basis. You have these buckets of 1.4 billion people in China, another 1.4 billion in India, another 1.4 in the rest of Southeast Asia, and then 1.4 billion in Africa. And they are using a fraction of the energy that the lucky 1 billion of us, as I say, who live in the US and related countries use. Yet today, again, we've gotten another editorial in the Financial Times from the head of the IEA highlighting peak fossil fuel demand will happen this decade. And I think, Goldman, Maynard, I spent my career at Goldman as an analyst, and we used to always argue with the editors, stop wordsmithing us, stop couching all our language. I will say there's no chance they would let me use the word will. If you want to say may, if you want to say could, that's fine. The certainty of these views is what I think we would push back on. And so everyone's entitled to their opinion. I say the math to me is simply overwhelming. In fact, the math on the energy needs of the rest of the world is so overwhelming, the new stuff has to work. It's going to have to ramp. We're going to have to electrify a whole bunch of stuff in order to satisfy the energy needs of the world. And so if I bring it back to where we are today, I think a mission of ours at Verigen is both energy literacy, pragmatism, but also trying to take energy out of the culture war issues. And so my point in raising this is not to critique Fatih Birol. He's absolutely entitled to his view, but it is to say to our partner companies, to any investors that are watching, this is still a mindset that's out there. It is a worm that is slowly starting to turn. So if you do the analysis and you similarly conclude that the energy needs of the rest of the world are in fact overwhelming, and if we're at a time where still large portions of the world think it's possible, some say certainly, some say possible, that traditional energy demand is going to be peaking, that is the opportunity in this sector. We're not making an investment recommendation here. There's going to be a lot of volatility. China may be going through economic challenges right now. The US, we're not sure if we're having a hard or soft or no landing. Europe's got economic challenges. None of this is about short-term bullish or bearish calls. That's not what we do. But what we are saying is there's the opportunity to take risk in this sector. If not today, then in coming years, and we need it. We need a healthy US and Canadian oil and gas sector. We need companies that can recognize where in the world should we go to help satisfy those needs. And the more you get these kind of editorials, the more that mindset stays there, that maybe we don't need it. And all I'd say is don't get upset about it. It's not about fighting culture wars. It is about taking risk and adjusting corporate and investment strategies accordingly. And with that, Maynard, I'm very excited for our guest today. And I think it's being a very timely and great discussion on the shipping sector. I'll turn it back to you, Maynard.
Great. Thanks, Arjun. Yeah, I think, John, as we turn to you, one joke we have around here is we're a little wary of people who look into the future and say it will definitively be X, because we all know, at least from our experience in energy, it almost never works out the way that you're predicting. Welcome to the show.
I love that analysis with my journalism background as well. Watching those headlines, watching how media really moves some of these narratives. I agree with everything that was just said, including Mike's talk about the importance of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve just had their first maritime meeting in New Jersey last Friday. So a lot of these things are starting to tie together, but it's going to be bumpy roads.
I got to grab that nugget while you're offering it. What is a Federal Reserve maritime meeting, just for all of us who are curious to know more?
Well, when they calculated the CPI and other, Fed matrices, they didn't include shipping in any of this. They didn't look. There were no maritime experts working at the Federal Reserve. There's certainly no ship captain there, and I'm a big believer in that operational expertise being in these organizations. They didn't have it. And then with the port congestion crisis during COVID, they quickly realized they need the data is not good out there. There isn't very good shipping data. So they started creating their own shipping indexes, and it mostly focused on containers, shipping containers, which was the main problem then. But they are starting to realize that, you need the inputs, the bulk material, and of course the energy. So they're slowly starting to, and they just had their first Maritime meaning inviting industry leaders. I believe it was in New Jersey with the Port of New York, our largest port, to talk about how do we look at the shipping and how do we incorporate that into our own Federal Reserve minutes and thinking.
That's great. That's fascinating. If we were drilling a well right now, John, I'd say we've already hit pay dirt right there. That's
I've drilled many wells as a captain of a drill ship, and you can't do it that fast. That's dangerous there.
Well, let's just jump in, if you don't mind. We've gotten a chance to study your background. You grew up on Long Island, and you kind of got a little bit of a taste there for shipping from watching the boats on the Long Island Sound, and now you've made a career in shipping. Do you mind just telling us a little bit about your personal journey? I know our viewers would find it really interesting to hear your story.
Yes, a strange story indeed. I grew up on the Long Island Sound in Larchmont, and I just fell in love with sailing and computers. Oddly enough, my dad wanted me to follow in his footsteps and go to Cornell Medical School, and I said, no, I want to do computers or shipping. And I got really bad advice from a high school guidance counselor who said there's no future in computers. My aunt was also the first supercomputer programmer for IBM, and she said, this is a hard industry. So I said, I'll be a ship captain then. And I went to the Naval Academy, and I spent a year there. And unfortunately, my father got terminally ill with cancer, and I transferred over to the Merchant Marine Academy in New York State there to be closer to home. And then I found these ships. It's real interesting. The school's tiny. It's under the Throgs Neck Bridge, but the graduates have a higher a salary after graduation than Harvard or Yale graduates. And it's because the US Merchant Marine has shrunk so much, and it's left the news so much that there's just a absolute hunger for ships officers and engineers to go to these technical colleges. So I got my bachelor's in international trade and logistics, and also a ship captain, a junior mate, not a captain yet, licensed to be an officer, navigation safety officer on large ships. Worked on tankers for a number of years. And then I found the offshore drilling with the drill ships. So
you did work at Transocean. You wrote a book, Fire on the Horizon, about Macondo from a very different angle. I might ask you just to talk a little bit about before we go to gCaptain, talk about the book, your experience in the offshore oil and gas industry. I think for sure that's an interesting part of your background.
Well, I was navigating these super tankers going up to Alaska, million-barrel tankers, and I got this call from a friend who worked at Transocean and said that these two brothers from India were leasing a drill ship, and it was an old drill ship built in the 70s, and they were looking for natural gas in the Bay of Bengal, and it was relatively shallow water. We didn't really have the technology. We didn't know how to work the computer systems. There weren't good seismic surveys. So they really needed a guy who knew computer systems and shipping. So I got on this old rusty drill ship with Transocean. It was being replaced by the new generation drill ships, went over to India. It took us 6 months, a lot of failed starts, and then we found the largest natural gas reserve in the world. Won the Guinness Book of World Record at the time, and worked with these two brothers who are rather eccentric and fighting all the time. And that was the Ambani brothers, now the wealthiest men in India. And it was all, after that, they expanded greatly. I moved back to the Gulf of Mexico to the largest, most technologically advanced drill ships. I worked there for a while, and the industry was expanding so rapidly that people were getting promoted. You used to wait till you were in your late 40s, 50s to be captain. I got my first captain offer at 28, turned it down. And then we started seeing incidents as everyone was kind of working a level or two above their proficiency level. And we had multiple fires on my ship. I blew the whistle, and Transocean fired me. And the interesting thing about energy and natural gas is, you think it's anti-environmentalists and such, but my wife is a huge environmentalist. She works on oceanographic ships for years. Now she's a teacher. But I went into these interviews saying I'm an environmentalist. I want to protect the environment. I want clean energy, clean gas, LNG, and was immediately offered my own ship by BP, and it was a Pride at the which got bought out by Valaris. So I went to Korea, built this almost $1 billion drill ship, and then as I was taking it back to the Gulf of Mexico, the fire on the horizon exploded. I had already started gCaptain. I took some time off work and went down to New Orleans and really started digging into this story. The media, there used to be dock reporters. If you go down the Battery in New York, right next to Staten Island Ferry is a building. It's the Coast Guard building now, but it used to be a building that the city of New York gave to journalists to report on ships, because ships were important and ships were the first wave of information that came in. And that all left. There's only one dock reporter left in the country. He's an older gentleman, Carl Melty of the San Francisco Chronicle. And that expertise left. But you still have maritime stories dominate the world news every 12 to 18 months. And we really wanted to fill that gap. So with the Deepwater Horizon, I went down and you had the best journalists from all of the journals. And they're saying, in the trial, they're bringing up things like BOP and a subsea module, and fracking materials and mud weights, and the journalists had no clue. So I started helping them with the story, and that led to the top NPR investigative reporter was like, you should write a book on this. So I teamed up with the former editor-in-chief of the Washington Post magazine, Tom Schroeder. And because I was an insider in the industry, I was a captain, I had that expertise, but we were the only journalists who the crew talked to. Because as you know, the oil and gas industry is very close-knit, very quiet, very taciturn. And so we were able to get that story. And we wanted to focus on the story of the crews, the executives, and not really bring in all the politics and the environmental stuff. But we wanted to focus on the people and what really happened that day.
Well, it's we all remember it, of course. It was an incredible story. And so you transitioned somewhere in there. You mentioned it. You had started gCaptain. And it's really quite interesting because, as I recall, some of the features, it was you and your brother, and you guys started thinking about this online communication world is fascinating, and there are these communities that we could unite. And if I have the story right, you guys did skiing, and then you did shipping, and he ended up taking skiing, and you took shipping.
Right. Going back to the Bonney brothers and the Reliance, the guys there, they were real entrepreneurs, and they, came to me all the time and was like, if I was American, I would move to Silicon Valley. That's where the innovation is. Why are you living in Manhattan, John? And so I picked up my family and I moved there and looked at different ideas. This was, now you can just start a website in the cloud with a push of a button, but this is where I had to use my computer expertise and code the server and fly down to Austin and stick it in a rack. And, we raised $6 million very, very quickly in the first year with angel investors, venture capitalists in the area for a ski website. And we had Olympic skiers. We skied every continent, had video cameras. We did a full-length movie. It was easy raising money. But then when the ski melts in the summer, I said, hey, we got these servers. I'm a ship captain. By that time, I had raised my license up to captain. I said, and the media just was butchering shipping and energy stories. So I said, let me write about this.
Butchering, you mean just not getting them right, not having the details.
Right. Not having the expertise, grabbing those wrong headlines, making false predictions. we said earlier. And, there were trade publications like Lloyd's List was the longest running publication in the history of the world, print. But trade winds, they still are around, but they weren't digital, and it was behind a huge paywall. To this day, some of those subscriptions are over $1,000. Unless you have a Bloomberg terminal, you're not reading this news. So we wanted to provide free expert insight into what the incidents, but also the energy markets and the shipping markets from an operational, real ship captains, real engineers, real energy, petroleum engineers and such. And we wanted to do it for free. Now there's a lot more competition. We're still number one instead of page views, but we look at it as, this information is getting everyone better qualified to understand the energy and transportation markets.
So we'll attach a link to gCaptain as part of this. As you read it, it's stunning the variety of things happening in shipping, and some of them will have to do with security, and some of them will have to do with accidents, and some of them have to do with commerce and the big companies, and others are technology or ESG or transition related. It's really a stunning amount of just the broad scope of it. And it's also, I would say, your newsletter is, it's very functional in that it's just trying to tell the story. Like, there don't seem to be a lot of opinions necessarily in it as much as it's just sharing what is the reality.
Yes.
I think that was either a question or a comment. But tell us about how you pull it together.
We try not to get into politics and such. It's increasingly difficult in some of these conversations. But we try to give the facts from an operational point of view. The guys on the ships, on the pipelines, and the refineries, what are they thinking? What are they talking? But with the changes in geopolitics, it's becoming increasingly hard, and that media bias continues. We call it sea blindness. Our shipping industry was the first that was outsourced around the world. The US Merchant Marine went from the largest in the world with over 10,000 ships. Now we have 80 ships in international service carrying the US flag. So, the ranks absolutely collapsed. We didn't do deep water drilling very well until, I started with Transocean 20 years ago. We didn't have that expertise. So there weren't opportunities for ship captains and operational guys and even shipping executives to really go into the major banks, the major analyst shops, the major media. These guys just weren't available. So we wanted to provide that information into the markets and help people really understand it. And, with the ski, we tried doing very niche. We were going to have the best site for Telluride and the best site for Vail. And we realized with gCaptain, all of the professional shipping segments are completely underreported. So we wanted to give that real analysis and try to bring all of the markets together and fight the sea blindness, because it's just over 90% of everything is moved by the ocean. And because our only industry in the US that is really successful is aviation. Energy is successful at times and then goes down, but aviation is successful. Americans look at the transportation through an aviation lens, and we always try to solve the problem with aviation. But our entire Air Force's airlift capacity, plus all of the UPS and FedEx planes and everything else, all of those planes combined have less capacity than one new Maersk giant container ship. And it's a physics issue. The amount of trade, it just has to go on ships. But we've completely lost the regulations. Like I said before, the Federal Reserve completely ignored us. And, shipping sparked off that inflation, which went into other things. And people have kind of forgotten about that. But the Federal Reserve hasn't. But meanwhile, Congress doesn't understand shipping. The Navy's given up on shipping because of 20 years in global war on terror. They gave up their khakis and put on camo and went and helped the army in Afghanistan. Our shipbuilding, all of these things have kind of decayed here. And then, China at the same time has been growing expansively its maritime fleet. So all of these problems, you have inflation was really started by a shipping incident, and that has augmented the European energy crunch. We have plenty of energy. It's how do you get the energy to Europe when the Nord Stream pipeline goes down? That's a shipping problem. The world food crisis with the Black Sea grain, there's plenty of food. It's moving it. The Black Sea, it's very much a maritime war, although CNN, New York Times focuses on a land war. It's a maritime war. And now with China, our biggest problem is Taiwan, and we focus on the chips, but it's an island nation. It's really a maritime security problem. And we don't have the ships. We don't have the Navy. And the media doesn't focus this. The analysts don't focus on this. But these problems keep coming up, and we look at other solutions. We're trying to plug in policy to fix problems that are foundationally at sea. And that's leading to a lot of these false calls for things like the energy, this misunderstanding, being, I think you said carbon neutral in 2030. It's we could potentially do it, but even cars and such, how are we getting all that copper and raw materials and thing? It has to come on ships, and a lot of our maritime networks are broken.
So, John, there was so much in there.
I'm giving you the fire hose. You can slow me down.
Yeah, that was great. If you were going to think about the 3 or 4 biggest issues in shipping today, whether it's an unsafe area or it's a some sort of choke point for some other reason, or it's people, or what would you say are just like the 3 or 4 biggest issues in shipping today?
1, 2, and 3 are all the exact same thing. And, I got the Financial Times right here. I watch Bloomberg every morning, and I read this, and it's just not mentioned. And I talk to all these guys, and I try to get this, but out. But it's a geopolitical crisis, particularly on the seas and in the air. If there's one thing you take away from this call, it's the importance of ton miles. It's how many tons can you move per mile. Ships are 10 times more efficient than trucks, 3 times more efficient than railroads, but 10 times more than trucks. Trucks are 10 times more efficient than aviation. Aviation's 10 times more efficient than helicopters. Helicopters are 10 times more efficient than rockets. So you're talking 1,000x by rockets. And where's all the VC money and attention going? It's going to SpaceX. And we're forgetting that fundamental manner. We cannot move our cargo onto EV highways or even EV trains because of this energy mix. If we electrify our entire highways and cities, we still have 90% going on the ocean. And there's a huge push on the ocean in order to make that sustainable, but it's already incredibly sustainable. So we're pushing against, pretty much thin air. But that's not even the biggest issue. The biggest issue is that's the ton miles of movement, but where? It's ton of miles. When you have an incident in the Black Sea, it forces traffic to, Black Sea Russian oil just used to have to go to Europe. Now it's got to go all through the Suez to India and China. And oil in Indonesia is now going back to Europe. So you've doubled the amount of miles in order to move this stuff, but you haven't doubled the number of ships. So when there's an increase in ton miles, and the biggest increase in ton miles is these geopolitical concerns, it really puts pressure on the shipping markets, and then it pushes to the energy markets. Then the price of goods goes up, and it goes into inflation, right? Meanwhile, you also have port congestion, and you have these other issues with shipping that the analysts, that you can't read about this on the Bloomberg terminal or the Financial Times because there are no journalists or even analysts really covering shipping. You have a few. We have one great analyst, Jeffries. Omar at Jeffries does an amazing job. Some of the other bankers have part-time analysts, but no one's looking at this stuff. And then they try to plug in policy issues with the other. But it's war too, right? No one's, even the analysts like Omar, are not looking at war. Why are we moving around the Black Sea? It's because of Russian warships. We have missiles. We have mines. Ships can't go through that, and no one in the energy sector or the financial sector is looking at a ship can't go past a minefield. That's a huge issue here.
So the Black Sea, we all know that's a tough neighborhood right now, to say the least. Where are the other places? Is it like the Strait of Hormuz, the around Taiwan, the South China Sea? Like, it seems like the Horn of Africa. Like, where are the places where it's just not safe, or you're going to have trouble moving cargoes?
Well, we in the Navy world, and I briefly went to the Naval Academy, and I turned my back on the Navy for years, looking at energy. But for the last year, 2 years, I've been really focused on these naval issues, because we've had this period of safe seas, no pirates, no aggression, no freedom of navigation, since World War II, with little bits of piracy that the Navy squashed. And now we don't. That era is gone. So the Navy calls it choke points. These are the critical areas of where the shipping comes through. The most important is the Singapore Strait. That one is relatively stable. It's probably the most stable. But then you have the Strait of Hormuz. You have the Suez Canal. You have the going around Africa, South Africa. You got Argentina going around South America. You have the Panama Canal. And then you have the South China Sea, which funnels, all of the exports from China have to go through. Well, every single one of them is under a crunch right now. We had the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, the Marines are getting on tankers. We're putting U.S. Marines on tankers because the Navy and the military pulled out of the region after Afghanistan. And the U.S. does not have the interest to protect the ships or have the warships in there. And a lot of those warships are getting pulled to China. And what's happening is Iran is getting more daring with these drone and ship attacks and taking over ships. So we're trying to put Marines, and we're putting Marines on foreign flag ships, which we're not even sure is legal. You move to the Suez Canal. We had the Ever Given block up the Suez Canal. We know how quickly that can go. South Africa is increasingly having naval drills with Russia and China. So you can't necessarily go around anymore. You come in, you have the Gibraltar. It's always a little bit unstable with Morocco and such going in there. Panama Canal has record droughts. Argentina has record inflation and real monetary instability now. And of course, the South China Sea, China is just getting incredibly aggressive there, blockading Taiwan, really pushing merchant shipping around. So I'd say Singapore Strait's the most important, and that's relatively secure right now. But all the other choke points are close, are in this period, which we've never seen before, where things could go south quickly.
John, pretty fascinating stuff. The question I wanted to ask is, what does the supply and demand look like in the shipping industry? And the reason I ask that, if you go and ask sort of a deep water driller right now, if you wanted to get in a queue to build a deep water ship, which none of them are going to be doing, right? We're talking 3 or 4 years ago, it may have been $500 or $600 million, and now they're talking $1 to $1.2 billion, and that's maybe 3 or 4 years out. So, what does a drilling queue look like? Where are the big shipyards globally? Just kind of give us an idea of what that looks like and who controls that domain.
Right. I built a drill ship for BP, the Valaris. Now, we've ramped up quickly. I think there were something like 21 drill ships in the world in 2000 when I joined it. I think only 13 were high spec. Then in the right before the Deepwater Horizon, even after, we built over 100 high-spec drill ships, and then we scrapped a lot of them. So these expensive ships are scrapped. These ships were all built in South Korea. All of the U.S. shipyards, and they're all in deep trouble, have kind of converted over to Navy ships, and all of those contracts are way behind, way over budget. Incredibly in trouble. Europeans gave up everything except really high spec cruise ships and some specialty vessels like icebreakers in Finland. Japan's always been very good at bulkers and regular tankers, and they continued well. And then the Koreans really took that high spec stuff. It wasn't just the drill ships, like you say. They were going for $700, $800 million at the height there. And then we really invested in these mega LNG ships. You had the Shell Prelude. I think that was something like $14 billion. It was more than an aircraft carrier. And Korean shipyards are 5 to 10 times more efficient than a American shipyard. So, I mean, the Koreans just got phenomenal at kicking these things out. But China really wanted to be a maritime nation, and they started subsidizing real heavy into shipyards and shipbuilding. And at first, Korea did a partnership where they would get some of the hull sections in China, and they would bring them to Korea and put the high spec equipment on. But then China started copying the Korean way of doing things and getting better and better. And now they have taken, I think it's about 50% of the market. And then the downturn in oil and gas really hit Korean yards and Japanese yards hard. So they started laying over shipyard workers. Now they want to ramp up. There's great interest in ramping up, but there's a demographic collapse. Part of the reason Korea took over from Japan is because of that demographic collapse and the financial stagnation from the 90s. Korea is now where Japan was in the late 90s, and they can't ramp up that capacity. They just don't have the people. China's taking that market share, but it's a increasing risk it's always a risk put in an order for a $500 billion ship. That's increasingly a risk now in China. And then we have what is a fragmented market. The order books for drill ships are among the lowest levels we've seen in years. The tanker market, both crude, but particularly product tankers moving gasoline and diesel, they are at the lowest levels in modern history since World War II, the amount on order, and they're aging out. So we have an incredibly old tanker fleet, and that's aging out. Meanwhile, when the port congestion crisis happened, the container shipping companies made billions of dollars in a very short period of time. And what did they do foolishly? Ship owners always do. They take that money and they put it into new ships. So we have a record high order book in containers and a record low order book in tankers. We also, LNG, we got away from those super projects like the Prelude, LNG FPSO, these do everything mega ships. And that money got retransitioned with the fracking in the US to export terminals and LNG ships. So the LNG order book is extremely high. We're 50% of the fleet now. That's how many new build orders we have. So the problem for the drillers and the tanker companies and some of these other market segments is that capacity, shipyard capacity, is taken up by the container ships and the LNG. So even if you wanted to build, you can't. Plus, on top of that, you have these new environmental laws at the International Maritime Organization, where even if the tanker companies wanted to build new ships, we haven't decided what kind of fuel these ships will use in 2030, 2040. So you could put an order for a new ship right now, and 10 years from now, it doesn't meet regulations. So segments of the market, and the energy market, particularly LNG, is absolutely on fire with new builds, but other segments especially tankers, is really running on shoestrings here.
Yeah, so just maybe to steal from Arjun's thunder a little bit, he's been talking about oil and gas. It's going to continue to grow for the next 20 and 30 years. And if that is the case, which I do believe is the case, it's interesting you say that basically feds are looking at inflation, because it just says to me we just do not have enough shipyard capacity around the world, and pricing is just going to keep going higher and higher. Maybe not for certain segments, but in shipping in general, overall, it's just going to keep going higher. So we have an embedded inflation going forward. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. I loved everything he said. And it's not just the shipyard capacity, its demographics prevent us from increasing that shipyard capacity. Those new environmental rules, uncertainty, prevent us from increasing capacity. And then getting back to that geopolitical struggle, as we had Iran's literally boarding tankers. You have Ukraine hitting tankers with drones. Mines are taking out tankers. What you need is warships. We're going back to the convoy system, and I can't understand this enough. In parts of the area, we are already in the convoy system. Well, even if you have the ships, now you need the warships in order to protect those ships. And the whole U.S. Navy has less than 300 warships. So there are 50,000 merchant ships in the world. How can you protect that with under 300 Navy ships? You can't. So the ship owners are going to safer passages. They're telling the cargo owners, we can't go through the South China Sea. We got to go around Australia because it's safer. And by the way, they have the incentive to do that because they're getting paid per the day. So the longer the voyage, the more the ship owners are making money, which is absolutely putting this is the cause of this. I believe a lot of this, 90 barrel oil and this problem. And then you have the government. We have this abundance of LNG and gas here, but the U.S. Maritime Administration under the DOT, Pete Buttigieg, and I'm not being political here, every single administration has decreased the size of the Maritime Administration. But now we have LNG terminals. We had the Cheniere terminal. Chesapeake Energy went to Cheniere and said it was originally an import terminal and said, make this an export terminal. And it was a huge boon for the United States. And we have more terminals coming up, but the Biden administration is not approving those export terminals. So we could supply a lot of this, fix a lot of this problem, but they just refuse to approve these export terminals. And the Maritime Administration, our FAA, for example, the Federal Aviation Administration has 44,000 employees. The Maritime Administration has 800. So even if you have a brilliant idea and you have the capital and you have the PE and you have everything else, and you have the agreement of government and you have the agreement of Congress, there's literally no one in this administration who can sign off on it because they only have 800 people and 400 of them work at the merchant marine shipping is the only commercial entity in its world with its own service academy. Now there's Naval Academy, West Point, Air Force Academy. Then there's the Merchant Marine Academy in Long Island. We're the only one with it because we used to recognize the importance of this maritime. We don't anymore. So half the administration is working on education. 400 people to approve terminals, to approve new shipyards, to approve new oil and gas things. It's a major constraint.
Don, I had no idea that any area of government had shrunk. So while I would like to see more people in your area, I might take that away as a slight positive, even though I think maybe we could reallocate some people from some other areas to this very important sector. So good job by your industry actually to contributing to some, government controls, I guess. But I'm going to take a bunch of things away from this conversation. It's been a fascinating discussion. One is I'm going to have to add shipping to my list of sort of basic industries that people have forgotten about, and it's going to come back to bite them. And I commented on my views on oil and natural gas, and you really were, I think, made some great points about how critical shipping is in terms of moving goods around the world. Got this age of geopolitics and rerouting things and supply chains being disrupted. And this is a really critical industry. I wanted to morph to some of your comments about efficiency and some of the environmental considerations that are being put upon all industries, and I'm sure yours as well. And I'm appreciative of the fact that I believe it's mainly through sulfur content reductions and other efforts, shipping fuels have become significantly cleaner relative to 10, 20, 50 years ago. But there is this mantra. We can debate it, we can agree or maybe disagree with it, that every company in every industry has to be, quote, net zero by some round number year that's currently 2050, when shipping is already so efficient, but you are facing these pressures. And I know it might vary by LNG vessel versus product tanker, et cetera. What does net zero mean for the shipping industry? I'm not arguing, is it going to be achieved? What I am saying is that there are countries and areas of the world that are saying it has to be this way. And you may want to ship stuff to these areas. I'm thinking Europe as an example. Is there such a thing as a net zero fuel? I'm sure there's not today, but can there be in 20 or 30 years? If it's not bunker fuel, what is it? Are you going to burn hydrogen on ships? Is it going to be LNG? Can you explain what a net zero world would mean for the shipping industry, even if it's impractical? I don't need to lead the witness here. So,
for absolutely no one has the answer to that. I mean, Maersk just threw up its arms and wrote a huge check to McKinsey to have them figure it out for them. And you know how that can sometimes end up with consultants. No one really knows what that answer is, and there's frustration in the maritime world because aviation fuel use gets unreported. If the ton miles is the one thing that you look at, to understand the flow of energy. Number two is really aviation. You look at COVID, ships never shut down during COVID. We would continue to operate ships, but CO2 levels absolutely collapsed and oil went negative, right? So shipping was not burning enough oil to even, it went negative. We couldn't store it. And then they opened up railways and CO2 levels went down and we still had major outflows. Then they opened up highways and truck transportation. It was still very low levels. And then they opened up the airports and it went skyrocket. There's only one non-oil and energy major that owns a major refinery. Do you happen to know who it is? It's Delta Airlines.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, it's the old Marcus Hook. It's one of those former Sunoco refineries. That's right.
Right. And we could debate whether that was a good idea or not. But, we can't debate the fact that the physics, you cannot put EVs on planes. You just can't get up to altitude. And that's the reason. If I take it 1 pound and I lift it up 10,000 feet in the air, it's the getting to altitude that's an issue. Where I can take this, put it on a ship, and people think it's the frictionless of the ship that's making it efficient. No, it's the fact that I can go to New York Harbor all the way to Zanzibar and not go up one hill. That's the real efficiency. And we don't look at that. We don't understand the vast amount of fuels that the aviation industry uses. I mean, the number one consumer of energy in the world of fuel is the US Air Force, and it's hidden in all these different budgets. It's 60% of all DoD fuel use. So we don't focus on the energy, and it's impossible to put EVs. It's energy density, regular physics. It is possible to move ships to more efficient systems, but which system is it? Are we going nuclear ships? Are we going hydrogen? Are we going green ammonia? Then you dive down into that. Are we doing are we doing regular hydrogen? Are we doing blue hydrogen? Are we doing green hydrogen? And then these are explosive chemicals. You already have a tanker, which is very dangerous, that's carrying a load of gasoline, and now you're loading hydrogen on the back. That's extremely problematic. But the bigger problem is, and LNG, a lot of ships now are already dual use LNG, where they can burn marine diesel oil or LNG. But most of them have the capability, but they're using the marine diesel oil because it's cheaper, especially now with this LNG crunch. So they meet these temporary requirements and they say they're greening up, but are they really? But the biggest issue is it takes more energy to make LNG, and the LNG is less efficient in the ship's engine. So you're actually burning more BTUs to do that. Same with green hydrogen. And some of these take an incredible amount of energy to produce. There are very, I'm a big proponent. I think there's only one solution, and that solution is to make either ammonia or green hydrogen with nuclear power at these choke points. So if you put a nuclear reactor in Singapore and in Morocco and in Florida as we round into the Panama Canal and in the Singapore Strait, and you use that nuclear energy to make environmentally efficient hydrogen or ammonia or any of these fuels of the future, that could be a major carbon offset. That's capable, but nuclear requires the government. Nuclear particularly requires the military. And let's not forget the military. You talk about expanding numbers. Our shipbuilding industry has completely collapsed. The FAA is 44,000. The Maritime Administration is 800 people. The U.S. shipbuilding arm of the U.S. Navy is 86,000 people, and they can't get a ship out on time and on budget. So you want those nuclear shipbuilders to work on nuclear reactors for the marine industry. The regulations, when you start getting into the Nuclear Regulatory Committee, are mind-bogglingly difficult.
I mean, it's pretty remarkable. In our effort to go to net zero at a time of geopolitical turmoil, we're going to be actually using more energy to ship more stuff over more ton miles than we were previously. And that is for sure energy intensive. It is almost certainly inflationary. It's disruptive. And at the end of the day, we're going to need more ships. But I really appreciate your perspectives today. Thank you.
Go down to New Jersey, the dock. There's a car carrier ship right there that's completely burned out because of EVs. You know, we do not know how to put out these fires. You know, we have the entire and this is how underappreciated shipping is in the infrastructure bill. We were all excited. We need maritime ports. We need river. We have the best river system in the world. We need a dredge. We need docks. We need ports. Out of the whole infrastructure bill of 1.2 million, 0.07% is going to maritime related projects. It's less than $1 billion. While we're putting over $5 billion into electric buses, we don't know how to put out the fire on these buses. So we're putting kids on buses, spending $5 billion to put kids on buses that we don't know how to put them out. Meanwhile, all of the maritime networks on all our rivers, all our ports are getting 1/5 that amount. So I think that energy crisis, and look, we know how to do pipelines well, right? I mean, Nord Stream was an incredible innovation. You have Turk Stream, you have the Colonial Pipeline, but they're vulnerable with this geopolitical crisis. Nord Stream got hit. Colonial Pipeline, you had the cyber attack. The only fixed assets are very vulnerable. Ships can be protected by the Navy if we have ships, but they need more ton miles. So, but we're not investing in it, right?
So I think, speaking of ton miles, John, you're packing this podcast with fun fact minutes. Like if we had that ratio, like you're throwing out more fascinating things to follow up on per minute than anyone in a long time. Well, one question for you. This comes up in, we had the governor of Alaska on. We had a guy on who had been embedded with the U.S. Army with Arctic warfare training. But the themes that both hit on are these warming that is going on. That means that some shipping routes are opening up across, I guess, the Arctic that haven't previously been open, or they're open longer. What would you tell us about that? And what's the data say about how some of that, some of those opportunities are becoming more apparent?
Incredibly fascinating. Right now, as we speak, and I don't know if the story's up on gCaptain yet, or my editor, Mike Schuler, is working on this, but a Cape-size bulker, this massive bulker that can carry 164,000 tons of iron ore is moving through the Russian Arctic right now. So there are two factors. Yes, it's warming, so you have more available space, but also this ton mile issue is creeping up. China has an enormous appetite for energy products, and even food. And they don't want it going through the choke points that, like Singapore, where Western allies really control the Strait of Hormuz. So they are really pushing. China, which is not an Arctic country, just built 3 large icebreakers. Russia has over 40 icebreakers. that they've built over the years. The United States has 1.5. We got one heavy and one medium, and they keep catching fire. We started the Coast Guard icebreaker project in 2010. By 2012, we had full funding for it, or the program office, the thing up. Now it's 2023, and we haven't laid steel on the first icebreaker. Our shipyards are completely and utterly broken. You have the big shipyard that was building this icebreaker. There's $9 billion in contracts to build this icebreaker. And icebreakers are important because even with the warming, you still need a big ship to go in there and clear the way, right? So this is vital. And the opportunities to open up these routes and protect Canada are absolutely enormous. Access to oil and gas, they're enormous, but you need the icebreaker. In 2012, we put in this thing. We've given over $9 billion in contracts to the shipyard VT Halter, which has priceless waterfront real estate. They have I think it's around $9 billion in secured government contracts that have been on the years for books. And they put a few $100 million into upgrades to do this icebreaker. That company just sold the entire shipyard for $16 million with an M. Our defense contractors, especially the overseas ones, are getting out of U.S. shipbuilding and industry as fast as they can. At the same time, factories and especially things like the CHIP Act are increasing construction in the U.S. We're absolutely they're trying to get out of the because all of the shipyards have some control by this NAVSEA organization that I taught, this behemoth with 86,000 people that they have meetings, they have inspectors, it's this organization that's just slows everything down. So you had this massive shipyard building our icebreakers that we've been trying to build for 20 years. It sold its entire operation in the US for $16 million. And we still haven't laid the steel on the first icebreaker. They're kind of doing a test icebreaker. But so we talk about this, and China's doing it right now. Like I said, right now, Russia's moving this in. China's helping them. They're opening up the Arctic, but the United States, and it's not just the United States. Canada has to meet 2% of GDP in their defense spending. That's a NATO requirement. I think they're at 1.2 million right now. 1.2%. They have to be at 2%. They will not spend on. They expect the U.S. Navy to come in and protect their shipping lanes. Well, a lot of that Arctic is Canadian, and they won't build the warships. They just did a small warship icebreaker, but we don't have the docks up there. We don't have the heavy icebreakers. We don't have the infrastructure to really counter China or counter what Russia is doing. So short answer, great opportunity, amazing opportunity for Russia and China. We're not doing anything. We have a lot of meetings. We have a lot of government, military, the Army and Air Force all have Arctic operation zones, and they're spending tens of millions of dollars, but without being able to get those supplies in on ships, I think it's all a waste.
I'm kind of making a list of to-dos here, John. As a country, we've got a lot of to-dos when it comes to shipping. Maybe just a couple last questions, because we're going to lose you. We've had so much fun. It's already been an hour. One is people. And Mike mentioned everybody's watching the auto strike. Everybody saw the UPS contract. There was a strike, or a averted strike in Australia around LNG. It just feels like, experienced workers, industrial workers, they're in short supply, and it's causing all kinds of problems. What would you tell us about shipping and just the people to do all this work?
Absolutely, it's a major problem, and my friends over at Bloomberg, Joe Weisenthal, Odd Lots podcast, does amazing podcast and includes shipping, and he's always writing about this, the jobs number with the Federal Reserve and the jobs. We're tightening rates, but the jobs are still there. this one's really easy. We have the largest, most well-educated generation in the history of the world all retiring at once. It's the boomers. And we're replacing it with Generation X, which is the smallest US generation, my generation. It's really a numbers game. And it's, the millennials had they're extremely smart. They had a late start. They didn't get these operational jobs because the boomers really took these jobs later in life. So as a result, they don't have the experience. So now it may take 2 or 3 millennials to fill one job that a LNG expert on an FPSO used to do before. So I think that's the big part of the number. US has better demographics than any other country. We also have one thing that very few countries have, and people want to come here. Korean shipyard workers, you talked about them, they want to come here. The shipyard companies, Samsung Heavy Industry wants to open here. We have talented labor from Europe and Ukraine, and they want to come here, but our immigration laws are really broken. So that's not an opportunity for us to expand. I think that's the problem. But, I'm all doom and gloom here, but going back to this fire hose of information, Maynard, the exciting thing is if you're willing to get your hands dirty and hire someone, if you're willing to hire someone with this expertise in shipping, the investment opportunities now are things I have never seen in my entire life. You could buy a shipyard with priceless waterfront real estate for $15 million. I mean, even completely pivot from the Navy, and if you fail, you could break that apart like the corporators used to do and make your $15 million back now. You're the largest tanker company in the US, which is the Navy's begging them to build more ships. OSG, Overseas Group, ticker symbol OSG. I think their market cap is $350 million now, might be $400 million. The replacement cost of one of their Jones Act tankers is $500 to $600 million. So you could purchase this, leverage the Navy, really get some smart guys in here. And if you failed 6 months later, you could sell every one of their ships for hundreds of millions of dollars and pocket a few $1 billion quick. There's been so little focus on shipping by the PE, by the banks, by the analysts, by the thing, that we're starting to see these absolutely incredible investment opportunities. And we're getting calls from PEs, we're getting calls from venture capitalists, but there's no one in-house in these organizations to vet the ideas. So they end up doing a lot of due diligence and then passing because they're not really sure about it. But incredible opportunities as well. And the US has the greatest river system in the world. So as we move these factories back in, if we can leverage those rivers, everything now, when you look at a factory, it's leveraged on the cost of transporting everything via truck. But if you put a factory like they did 100 years ago on the Great Lakes, on the Mississippi River, and you move that commodities and all the inputs in on ships, you could drastically lower the cost on things. And the analysts and the PE firms, they're just not seeing it. But once they start to, I think it's going to be a tidal wave, and they're going to pressure the government to really come up with solutions. The fact that MARAD doesn't have many people means that they could outsource a lot of these to private industry, and we could move quickly, especially if we fix immigration laws. So there's an opportunity for the U.S. to really take the lead here, but we're lacking the expertise to say yes to these amazing opportunities. I mean, right now, let's go buy OSG, try to sell the Navy contracts. If not, you literally can't lose money. The NAV on these companies is absolutely incredible.
Well, this is a fascinating place to end because, to your point, John, we pointed out so many of the issues, so many of the things going on in the world that are troubling. But we're also pointing to, like a lot of things, the U.S. could lead if we just did a little more strategic planning and got our act together. So, well, gCaptain is great. We're going to recommend it to all our friends. And John, this was really absolutely fascinating for you to take us on this tour of shipping. I know we all learned a ton. So
I love being here. Energy's my people. I was down in Houston for many years, and like I said, I think this is the start. Guys like you digging into these LNG terminal permits and dealing with how do we move this shipment better. I think it's guys like you and your followers who could really, set off the starting gun for amazing things. So thank you for inviting me.
No, it's great. And I was thinking the same thing as we went through that. We have a lot of industrial players right here in Houston that could get into some of this stuff and start making it happen. So, and we also, to Arjun's point, we finally found a part of government that needs expanding. That's fun. Who knew?
I'm not going on the record saying I suggest any government expansion. I just want to say that.
and we get it. Anyway, thank you, John Konrad. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.